Sherry, don't go long.
I'm Gundar Oswald, the program chair for the Chesapeake chapter, and we have here Matthew Hause from PCT to give us a presentation in some of the new areas of system engineering, where they're using model-based engineering to do the Internet of Things together. We also will have a presentation this weekend where he's going to talk about tools that we're using to do UPDM, which is a follow-on to DODAF. And we'll also have another vendor there. No Magic will be also there to give a half-a-day presentation on their approach to it. And both of these individuals have been on the committee for many, many years in developing UPDM. They started with they used SysML and used model-based system engineering concepts to create the UPDM. And the UPDM has been approved by DOD to be used in their projects. So no further ado, let's go and see it, Matt.
We're good to go?
Okay, everyone can hear me? When I would give talks in Europe, I would always say, let me know if you can't hear me at the back, because as you know, Americans are famously soft-spoken. And everyone would laugh, and I could never quite figure that out. My name is Matthew Hause, as Gundar said. I've actually come up here from the OMG meetings that are taking place down in Reston. And we're finishing off the specification for some of the stuff I'll be showing you in a minute, which is UPDM, which is a SysML-based implementation of DODAF 2.0, which also supports NAF and MODAF, the Canadian framework, which is DINDAF, and I'll talk more about this on Saturday, but it also supports things like human factors, security views, and a host of other things. So what we're going to be concentrating on now is looking at the interaction and the connection between DODAF architecture frameworks, in other words, the big picture, the view of the universe. How do you actually then break this down to a system specification? And then for one of your system of systems. And then how does this then connect to the Internet of Things? And how can this architecture approach drive the Internet of Things design? The Internet of Things, I think, sometimes gets the same reputation that programmers used to get back in the old days, which is you code until you sort of code yourself into a corner, and then you step back and say, I probably ought to design this. And then you start from scratch, and then you just do this in circles. And the Internet of Things, for it to be safe, secure, all the other elements, and to comply with all the ilities, you need to define it first. You don't want to take the Microsoft approach of having DOS and then say, let's make it Windows, and then say, by the way, let's have it ubiquitous and throughout an office, and gee, we probably ought to add security onto this as well eventually, because by then it's too late. And everybody's read some of the issues with security and with the Internet of Things. So designing this in early, designing all these elements in, and figuring out how it's going to grow and evolve over time is essential. So, things are changing. This is a quote from Harvard Business Review. There was an article that was looking at the Internet of Everything. And as it says, the changing nature of products is disrupting value change. Companies have to rethink, retool everything they do, and this is both internally and externally. Also, one of our clients is John Deere, who does tractors. And everyone's familiar of John Deere tractors. I once spent 2 weeks in a cornfield in Iowa detasseling corn. The people from John Deere were quite impressed. I had my bona fides when I spoke to them. And they've now gone from, you've got a tractor and it's got an internal control system and you can monitor it. And then it's switched to, here's your tractor. Again, what we're doing is we're now allowing remotely that you can keep track of it. And then we're taking our combine harvesters, planters, tillers, tractors, and we have a farm equipment system. And now you can run all of your farm machinery using an iPad. Basically, the farmer can sit at home and watch TV and every once in a while check, and using GPS and all the rest of it, all his equipment can go and plow his fields. And as you see here, it's looking at rain, weather, temperature. They've got sensors spread throughout the field, so they know if there's an issue with one part isn't growing as well as the other, you can water that part more, put more fertilizer, etc. It's basically smart farming. The other thing is, and I'll talk more about this on Saturday, is one of the, a bit of background. I've worked for Artisan Software Tools, who then became Atego, and last year was bought by PTC. And what we do is systems engineering at the enterprise architecture, also for SysML and the other issues, and also code generation, UML, basically model-based design. And PTC had a system architecture hole in their big view of the world, where they have requirements management tools, and then they weren't able to do the system architecture. And as everyone knows, if you can't do systems engineering, you can't really have a closed loop life cycle. But they had the elements for software, electrical, mechanical service, and basically the ability to then take your requirements, break these down into these different areas, go through verification and test, then look at connected manufacturing, in other words, smart factories, etc. And now what we're going to be looking at today is connected operations. That is to say, you've got a system, it's live, and you're keeping track of what it's going on. In a similar way that everyone knows about the Malaysian airlines. How did they know that the flight was still flying? Well, because the engines were still talking to the satellites. The Internet of Things has been around for a very long time and is going to be getting even bigger. And then to connected services, and then feeding all this back through. And what they call this is closed loop development life cycle. So you're not just throwing things out there and you never hear from them again. You're actually taking this information, using it to build better products. And this is what we're all about, after all. Everyone knows about model-based systems engineering, I take it? Okay. And this is what it is. And the points I like to make are, it covers a complete life cycle and has a direct effect on your generated artifacts, which means your process has to be optimized to make sure you're not putting things in the model that have no effect on what comes out. I always say you do the minimum of modeling to actually understand what your problem is and the rest of it, so that way you have the biggest impact on what the outcome is. And as we'll see, it encompasses architecture, systems, software, and can continue growing. And you've all seen this, where we go from the old approach of paper-based systems, and the new approach is that even if we need all these paper, and we actually need these all printed, if we build models of these elements and we're generating these documents, rather than back when I started in the 70s, we'd have 3 feet worth of specification that our customer would send you. I was doing electrical control systems. And then we would retaliate by sending back 6 feet worth of documentation, because that demonstrated that we knew what they were talking about and we could build this system. Of course, no one could read all of this. And then over the course of a 2 to 3 year project, you get 10, 15 change orders every month. And then basically the factory acceptance and the site acceptance test was you fighting with the customer on the shop floor of what the heck were we supposed to build anyways. So it was exciting back then. And what we're trying to do is, yeah, we're still going to have all this, but if somebody says, actually, this name changed, and you think, God, where is that? And you have to remember all the documents. So you have to be the one that goes to the typing pool, ladies, and say, by the way, this 300-page specification, you need to retype from page 240 all the way to the end. And no, we never want to go back there. So we're trying to shift towards a model-based approach and then generate all these other elements. And again, you've seen the diagrams where the systems model is at the center of things. It's not the be-all and end-all. It integrates with other elements. And again, this is what I'm going to be talking about on Saturday. The four pillars of this, again, you're probably familiar with this. We have structure, behavior, requirements, and parametrics. Does anyone not know this? Raise your hand if you don't know this. Okay, great. Right? I'll do it quickly then. This is your structural element, so you're able to define the different parts of your system in the same way that back in the old days when you were building radios from kits, as it were, this is your parts catalog. You then say, these are the things I need to assemble. The internal block diagram actually shows you how they're wired together and the fact that you might need 6 of these and 3 of these. You can then build diagrams to show the sequence of how these are used, define state machines, and also what is typically done for most engineers. They like to do functional breakdown activity diagrams, and this would be early on so that way you can specify what is your required behavior. Requirements have now been integrated into the model so you can add direct traceability to the model elements. So you can show requirements, relationships, more on that in a second. Also parametric, so you can take the various parameters or value properties of these various systems, tie these into parametrics, send them to an equation solver, and then start to do trade-off analysis and optimize your solution. So how do all these fit together? Well, again, requirements, parametrics, all the rest of it. What you're able to do is you can actually allocate the behaviors to physical systems and the interactions between the behaviors. And it's not just annotating on the diagram. You're not just adding a note on a PowerPoint slide. What you're actually doing is adding database relationships between the elements so you can tie these in. And this includes, here's my requirement that I have to stop wheel lockup, and that's satisfied by my anti-lock braking system. I can specify the brake modulator duty cycle. That can be used as a parameter here, which has chassis, tire friction, braking force, weight, position. And then I can feed this into an equation, and it'll say, yes, I can actually stop in 150 feet if I'm going 60 miles an hour. Does this prove that the system can stop in 150 feet? And the answer is, of course, no. But what it does do is it helps you eliminate an awful lot of configurations before you start banging metal together. It also lets you do cost-benefit analysis. Yes, if you decide to stop quicker, the car may actually cost more than you would like it to. So you may say, okay, let's do the minimum. So here's the example I'm going to give. This was a tool vendor challenge problem, and I did this for the Great Lakes region. And one of the points I make about all this is the slides you're going to see are a subset of the model that I built. And I actually didn't have time to start working on the model until 2 days before the presentation I had to give on this. And so I did this all in 48 hours. So again, the other point I'd like to make about architecture is, yes, you can spend 6 months on it, but what you're trying to do, again, is define the minimum, architect the minimum that is necessary in order to understand what you're doing. And the reason I built it as an architecture is because they came up with a set of requirements that said, this is your solution, now build it. And I thought, well, hang on, what's the context? What are the systems we're trying to build? How does this fit in to all the other systems? And how do we make sure that we have, for this problem, which is a traffic management system, the right context? And we'll talk about this as we go. So we've got Autoville, and what we're going to do is control different highways and paths and internal streets, etc. But we're also looking at availability monitoring. We're controlling parking facilities, and I've added some stuff, support for electric vehicles, for example, but emergency management, traffic control, and prediction is part of what we're doing. And we've got various highways, thoroughfares, the traffic data at intervals not greater than 1 mile. We're recording traffic data for 30 days. We're going to look at a centralized control room where we have to cover this for 24 hours, etc. There's a set of cost elements, and they want to see a project schedule as part of this as well. Okay? So We'll start out, and this is one of the diagrams I showed you earlier, where what we have is this is one requirement that says the system shall identify traffic levels. So we have a bunch of system elements that are going to provide this. We have video surveillance, and that's going to help us identify it. We have traffic sensors, and we have an activity that says we need to calculate traffic levels, and we also have traffic flow calculation software. And other examples here where we have the systems providing traffic data for intervals not greater. And this is satisfied by our system rule, which corresponds to sensor spacing. So all the different requirements, I can actually, inside of my model on this, which is a requirements diagram, tie them directly to the systems. Or these requirements can be distributed throughout the model, and I can show the traceability. And then later on, I can generate these different requirements reports that say, here are the requirements, these are the things that satisfy it, these are the things they trace to. I can also look at verification. If I have multiple levels of requirements, I can also show how you trace from your user requirements to your system requirements down to all the components, the test scripts, etc. throughout. One of the diagrams that UPDM and DODAF has is the AV1, which is your high-level architecture. This is a executive summary that shows you all the things in here. And Saturday, I'll be showing you this in a live demo. And what these are is these are actually hot buttons into the different diagrams. And quite often what I'll do when I'm building one of these architectures for a customer, I'll just list all the diagrams I have to build. And then as I build one, I'll replace it with one of these direct links into the diagrams. It also means if someone wants to review what's in the model, you can actually make this a narrative on what you've got. I always build one of these. This is what's called the OV1A. So this is my high-level overview of the system. And as you see there, we got the control center at the center, video, vehicles, and the traffic sensors are measuring and recording these. I have a traffic control center managing these. And this is the diagram that you use to talk to your stakeholders and convince them you're building the right system. And I can see by the looks of excitement on your faces that you're really engaged by a diagram with blue boxes and arrows. It leaps out. I mean, sexy does not begin to describe it. And I get a lot of customers or people, and when I do these presentations, they'll look at something like this and say, I can't show this to my management. And I think, oh my God, if you show this to your management, you need to get a new job. Because this is the diagram you show to your management, to your stakeholders, to demonstrate what are we doing. I've got a video here mounted on a pole. I'm showing the vehicles with the traffic, different types of traffic sensors, connecting to the mass media. And all I've done is take these blue boxes here and replace them with graphics. And you can do this with any of these systems and on any diagram, so that way I can communicate in the most effective way. I can show tanks, electronic components, and what a lot of our customers do is they'll build up profiles of these different graphics and stereotypes and all the rest of it. Why? So that way they can communicate in what you'd call a domain-specific language. One of the things that you can do is you can communicate with your stakeholders using use cases, because a lot of people will understand this, and it's a very user-friendly diagram. We've got our city government, what do they do? Provide funding, as well as the Highway Commission. Control room operator manages traffic. Emergency organizations manage traffic events. You can also use this to generate your stakeholders, get a complete list of them, and have a look at what are the different stakeholders, what are the contexts, what are their main goals in relation to the system. And again, this is a diagram you can very easily use. And if you wish, again, you can change these for the seals or the different symbols corresponding to these different people. And then these different use cases, as you see here, can then break down into either activity or sequence or other diagrams, so you can get the detail. One of the diagrams you start with, it's called the Capability View 1, which gives you what is your traffic whole life enterprise. In other words, what are the different phases you're going to try to do? And we've broken this up into 2 phases. Phase 1, we're going to look at traffic surveillance, calculating traffic levels, responding to events, coordination, and communication. Phase 2, which we see later, we're going to add, in addition to all these ones we've seen, traffic history, traffic management, we're going to look at prediction, traffic surveillance, and a host of other different ways of doing it. So I can also specify, again, if you're looking again at management, you're going to say, what's our enterprise goal? Traffic awareness. Enterprise goal for phase 2 is traffic control. And our vision for the whole thing is freedom of movement for Autoville citizens. So you can use terminology, language, etc., that corresponds to people who are trying to define the big picture. One of the things that the DoD has started doing quite recently is they're looking at, rather than we need a new tank, they're looking at capability management. A lot of this came from the UK, where the British MOD was doing capability-based acquisition systems. And it corresponds to what is the capability that you're trying to achieve rather than what are the systems you need. So if you step back and say, what am I trying to accomplish? Then it actually opens up a whole host of different solution spaces, different ways of achieving this. And the better you actually define what it is you're trying to do, the better you can actually then look at, does the systems that we're looking at actually correspond to supplying these? And again, at the upper left-hand corner, I've got my requirement, and I'm showing how it actually traces to the different capabilities. So I'm going to calculate traffic levels, coordination, and all these different capabilities here. I can then say, okay, within the context of traffic management, how do these depend on one another? So to do traffic control, I need to be able to calculate traffic levels. For that, I need traffic surveillance. For traffic control, I also need to have coordination, responding to the events, and traffic prediction. Traffic prediction requires providing a traffic history, and for reporting, I need communication. And by defining these different capabilities within different contexts, it means I can create another context and say, what are the capabilities and what are the relationships between them as well? It also means later on you'll see that I'm able to specify what are the systems that provide these capabilities, and you can look at if I have a dependency between the capabilities, the systems that provide the capabilities also need to have interfaces. Having defined these, what I can then do, and you'll see later I actually tie them to the systems that support them, I can then link these to the capabilities, tie them to the systems, specify when they come online and offline. You'll see this in a second with the project views. And I have a nice Gantt chart here, which says on this date, the system comes online and it will go offline at some other point. I was showing this diagram in Australia. And the fellow who was at my booth said, show me that again. And I showed him, and I showed how if you shift things off to the right, you get a big red line showing you've got a gap analysis. And he said, that's just what we need. Because somebody in our parliament shifted a project out because they said, let's save some money. And then it wasn't until right about a year before that they said, by the way, did someone, because this was for heavy lift helicopters, did someone extend the project for maintenance on our old helicopters? And they looked and no, and for 2 years they weren't going to have heavy lift capability because they were going to decommission all the old ones before the new ones came online. And they said, this is a sort of thing that we need to actually manage our capability. And this is what they're doing in their capability development group. They're using these tools at a very high level, at the decision maker level, to actually show them this. And he went even further. Using the meta model, he added things like cost. And they have other issues. For instance, they're able to, with their government, for every quarter, you can only authorize 8 different projects. So it would actually, if you tried to fit in the authorization of more than 8 project, it would cause a red flag. It looked at budget. If you exceeded your budget, it caused a red flag. So it allows them to actually do capability management at the highest level. And again, you can show the different project milestones. These are going to correspond to the initial delivery of the systems and also when they go offline. And by using these, you can see how am I doing with the equipment, training, logistics, organization, and specify if it's not applicable, complete, not started, for all the different types of milestones when they come online, etc. And this is the .mlpf for those of you who are familiar with it. You can also then specify what are the different capabilities, also what are the subsystems corresponding to this. So for instance, our control room has all these different systems and software and the rest of it. When do they go online and when do they retire? Having defined the capabilities, you're then going to break these down into the different activities. So for traffic prediction, as you see here, we're going to predict traffic flow, predict action hotspots, review event schedules, monitor the weather. I used to do, as I said before, I worked in energy systems for 20 years. And one of the things that, it's been about 15 years since I've been doing it, but they were looking at how do you do electricity usage prediction. And a lot of this was based on weather, but they also looked at things like, is the Super Bowl on? One of the things in London that they have to be careful of is when it's halftime at the World Cup, everybody runs to the kitchen and turns on their electric kettle. And so the electricity use just totally spikes. And you can probably guess the other thing that totally spikes, that is to say water usage, for obvious reasons. So they actually are aware of these events, and the electric and the water companies plan for these things. So, and again, so you look and you break down your capabilities and you say, what are the things I need to do in order to actually provide this capability? And then as you see here, you can break this down into a nice activity diagram. This is the start of one. And as I said, this is how far I got in 48 hours. And I've been pretty well true to not actually adding a whole lot of stuff and saying, see, I actually did all this in less than that. But your system test, monitoring the traffic speed, calculating traffic flow, analyzing the routes, searching for traffic events, dispatching emergency services, and you can specify parallel activities, decision points, also the fact that until you've dispatched emergency services, monitor it, rerouted traffic, and control the traffic signals, that you can't continue, at which point you execute the traffic accident report and then go back. Also, you're going to look at things at a very high level. So here's traffic control in the center. What are the different elements we have at the outer limits here? So we have city management, city services, event planning, mass media, traffic equipment is a big black box here, traffic sensing, weather services, and the archive. And it's showing the different flows of data going back and forth. I skipped the diagram that had all the different data elements that you're modeling here. But what you can then do is say, these are all the messages on the left. This is who sends it. This is the data content of the message. This is who sends it. This is who receives it. This is the element that it goes on. What I didn't have time to do is add the swim lanes to the diagram that allows me to then allocate these to the activities. So then I say, this is the person who sends it. This is what they did to create it. This is the person who receives it. This is what they do with it. Because if you don't have who sends it, who receives it, what they do to create it, what they do once they receive it, well, no one's doing anything to create data and send it, and certainly no one's doing anything once they get it. So you want to ask, why are we sending this message? Did we forget some activities? So you can use this as a validation technique, and it's what I often recommend people to do. And I can look at the context at the highest level of my Autoville system and look at what are my different operational modes of the system. So I've got here, as you see here, calculating traffic flow. So I'm monitoring the speed, predicting flow. And then after 5 minutes, I'll generate a report, archive the traffic history, and then carry on. And there's ways to show you can do this simultaneously. But here I'm monitoring, here I'm controlling, and I'm in the state of I have no active events. I'll search for traffic events. As soon as an accident is detected, then these are all the activities I perform. And when it's clear, I'll go back to no active events and searching for new events. And so it's trying to show the circumstances under which you do the various elements In other words, the pre and post conditions, as it were, for your different activities and how your system is going to change from one operational mode to another. You can do these organizational charts. So I have city government with the mayor, department heads, transportation departments made up of project managers, and you're able to specify what are called the person role types, or the posts, the billets, as they're called, and my different person definitions. And you can specify then a actual organization. So this is Ottoville City Mayor, and I have Marty Mayor, who's the department head. I'm the actual enterprise architect, which I defined earlier, and I'm filling the post of traffic manager architect. I have Michael manager. I'm really into alliteration, can you tell? You should see my search and rescue. We have Susie Swimmer and all sorts of different things. Anyways, I'm getting off. But this template that we define here actually is then, whoop, backwards, forwards, there we go, actually is going to then correspond to the actuals. In other words, if I try to draw relationships that I hadn't defined in the template, it actually keeps me from doing it. So I can define a pattern for an organizational chart, and then on this I can actually show the actual people. One of the things that people look at is doing competency frameworks. And in this I can define what are all the skills I'm able to specify, such as manage budget, navigate politics, manage requirement, computer control, traffic management, procure funding. And then I can take these different people, such as the control room operator, and say, he needs to have a skill at computer control, communicating effectively, and traffic management. So I can draw relationships between the skills that are required, who are the people that have to have them, and I can also specify who needs these capabilities, who fulfills these capabilities, and a host of other things. And then I can also specify from my control room operator, what activities does he perform? So for the people that you're trying to fill these out with, there's a lot of information you can put. And in the next version of UPDM, which we're finishing up, as I said, we've now got a whole set of human factors views, or human systems interaction views as well, but they'll go into far greater detail. I did the example model, and I think I have 25 different human factors views, and that's just for human factors. The example model diagram is almost 200 pages and growing. So we're trying to show people what is an actual set of examples. Anyways, so now we've got our system views here. And so we have different event venues, the internet, road maintenance crew, mass media, and these are all showing up as dash boxes. So what this means is they're out of the context or the control of our system, but they're elements that our system is going to interact with. So we're showing what is the information they send, what are the information received that comes in and out of the control system. I've got my control room operator here, control room 1 and 2, my 2 user interfaces, the control system shown here, and I'm showing different messages going back and forth between the user interface and the different actors. So again, I can start looking at human factors elements here, the vehicle, the traffic sensors, the video, traffic signals, traffic display boards, a host of other things. And then I can jump into the control system. So here's my control room. I can look in detail at the different message and then jump inside the control system and look at these interactions. I'll often use this when I'm talking to a group of people who are trying to build a software control system, which is showing distributed control, because all the elements that you see here are actually software objects. And what I've done here is I've said, here are my interfaces to the control system, in other words, the computer. Here are all the different traffic control software, display software, emergency services software, weather processing software, and I can have the inputs of the weather report comes in, which is processed by the weather processing software, which goes into the traffic prediction software. That's also got the different sensor data. The video data goes into the video processing, which then goes into traffic flow calculation, which then feeds into report generator. I can also use this for looking at traffic events. You get the idea. So what it's trying to define at this level is, what are the different software packages that I either need to buy or build, or look at having someone develop for me? What are the data interfaces that this system needs? How does this then feed or connect to the outside world? What are my data inputs, outputs? How often is this sent and received? And a whole host of other things. And again, I can generate this, and I didn't have time to actually link in all the data, but for each one of these, I can actually specify a whole set of metrics corresponding to how often it sends, data size, and how long it takes to process it, and a whole host of other things. You're probably familiar with n-squared diagrams. Again, this is the n-squared diagram. And bear in mind that this and this are automatically generated. And then I can, because this is on an Excel spreadsheet, I could actually take and create an optimization of this to look at how do I reconfigure the different interfaces so that that way I can see what things are connected to which. You could also take this and then say, what are the types of interfaces, and a host of other things. I mentioned that I would show you how you actually tie the capabilities to the systems, and I kept it for the end. The slide used to be at the beginning, and I thought, well, it's better to show people that this is where you actually tie this in, because it's not until you've actually defined these systems and linked them to the capability that you actually have these relationships. So having defined the systems that I'm going to need or will further specify in the actual system specification, I can now tie these two here. And as you see, I'm also looking at the fact that I have no systems for communication. So I need to start looking at, is this a true capability? What are the systems that are going to actually provide this? And of course, I'm going to have the internet radio links, depending on the control room operator, and a host of other things, yeah? I can also, as a part of this, specify what are the different activities that my different traffic event software is doing, report generation, traffic flow calculation. These are the different data messages that I've specified, and I would add data content as a part of this. And one of the things I also did is added cost values to all the different elements. And as a result, what I can do is add up the total cost of the system as well. For another example we showed cost over time. This was for the ICE management example that we did in Vegas. Where we're looking at delivering ice to people. So we actually did an integrated analysis over time as well. And having done all this, I can then run a review generation of the different model checks, and it'll show me all the different errors I have in my model. So what does this all have to do? How do we get to the Internet of Things? We've now, having done this, got a pretty good idea of what we're trying to control, how we do it. We're looking at the different traffic sensors. Now I'm going to concentrate on one very specific thing, which is we want to control parking. So I've got here a parking lot. And this is the summary of what the parking lot control system is trying to do. I've got an entry system here, an exit system there. I've got lights telling me when people can come in and out. I can set the capacity for the things, and I've got traffic display boards and also parking space display boards. So when you're driving into the city, it's very common in the UK and a lot of European countries, where you're driving into a city, it actually gives you a list of all the parking lot facilities. And this is one of the examples we teach in our SysML model. And one of the things I quite often do is say, let's actually look at how would you do this today? The fact that you'd want to have apps that correspond to these parking things. You'd want to tie this into Google Maps so that way you say, I want to go to this venue, and it can tell you, by the way, here's the closest one that actually has available parking. And if you're an electric vehicle, it'll tell you which one has electric vehicle charging spaces, and you'll see in a minute that aren't actually currently being used. Here's the high-level view where I've got the street and I've got cars coming in and out, 3 different parking lots, as you see here, corresponding to the parking lot system and the control, 3 different display boards, and it's showing me the inputs and outputs. So this is my high-level diagram for the parking context. And I've got a detailed diagram here showing me for the parking lot system, the controller. So using these, I can go all the way down to the detailed control system, the board that shows exactly how does the control system work just for controlling a parking lot. So again, as you've seen, the universe view all the way working my way down to this low level view. I can build up parametric diagrams that'll look at the various sizes of the, as you see here, the drive length, the vehicle surface area, how big a disabled space versus a motorcycle, etc. Run these through, and then it'll actually create a set of calculations to tell me how many parking spaces of each type I can fit in a certain area. And then going all the way down, there's several other diagrams which I've skipped, but down to a parking area where I have disabled space, car spaces, one or more motorcycle spaces. And here's my car charger, where I've got my electric car hooked up to the charger. And at my high-level context diagram, I didn't have a requirement for an electrical network. I also didn't look at, okay, how do I actually control this charging system, and a host of other things. So now I'm going to step way back again, and I'm going to look at how does this actually connect to the Internet of Things. This is our product, which is ThingWorks. Other products are available. There's a lot of Internet of Things stuff these days, but it basically involves different application elements and, of course, data analytics. That's the big thing. If you don't have data analytics, you got a lot of data, and it's going to fill up a lot of disks, and you're going to say, look at all those disks, aren't they wonderful? That's not useful. You need to analyze it, and that's why data analytics is becoming so huge. Here's an example showing the application development. The big thing the product does is it actually allows you to build user interfaces for different applications, and one of the things our product does is allow you to do simulations. So let's show you how these fit together. You'll start out with your ThingWorks, you'll do a mashup, and this can connect to the real world. You can take these thing shape in a SysML diagram, generate them automatically, and then this is the thing that can actually drive, if you generate code from these in a coding language, it will actually then drive what you have in terms of your real-life software. Can you run the video? Basically, to keep you from having to listen to me the whole time, we've got a nice video here. Okay, this is, again, the management view of our system. So I have a driver, a genuine car, a counterfeit car, the manager. He's got a central office. There's a cloud card payment system, the car itself, and a charging system. Go ahead and hit the play button. I don't think it's actually playing, otherwise that little mouse would move. Yeah, make it full screen and then the controls will show up at the bottom. There we go. There we go. Okay, we're running. Okay, so he's so we're explaining all the different parts here. Charging system, etc., the car, our driver, so on and so forth. And we're then going to look at what are the actual requirements that we need for this. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have your Autoville high-level requirements and then requirement specifications all the way down at all the different levels as a part of it. We seem to be stuck. So there we go. So these are our requirements. We've got driver requirements. What's the driver have to be able to do? Management requirements. And one of the things we want to have as a part of this is protecting against fraud. So we don't want people plugging in cars that are not authorized. We're going to build up, again, our use case diagrams for using charging stations. Things will have our charging the car. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, detecting fraud. So let's look at using the charging station. It's going to consist of driver unhooking the charger plug. And we've got some built-in sections here, such as charge and also shutdown when we actually get a car which is not authorized. So I can then take this sequence diagram showing the interactions between the different systems, the car, the charger, the cloud payment service, and we can specify a set of interactions where we say how much do we want, and then break these down into the different parts. Here is the sequence for showing what do we do. if we're getting hacked. So we just simply shut the system down, and then once the manager has decided the system's safe, he can then restart it. So we're taking a pretty authoritarian approach. Here's the car, the different interface types, the charger on the right, and the different parts. Here's the internal block diagram where I've got the charger, the counterfeit, genuine car, different switches. And what I now want to do is look at what is the behavior of the system, where I'm getting the info, checking the car, if it's a good car. Then I'm going to start looking at charging it, also elements for the other things. So here's the charger made up of the computer, the charger software, and the charger unit on the right. These are my different software assets where I have the car interface, the challenge, get info, plug connected, challenge response, info response, etc. Here's my actual system, so I can break this down, show LED bulbs, push buttons, so I have a 5 button, a 10 button, different outputs for the different LED bulbs, and I can build this diagram, which gives me sort of a user interface specification. I can then generate this, and by shifting things around, this is Visual Basic, I can then come up with this user interface, which is automatically generated. So I've got go buttons, 5 and 10 buttons, and I've got different user interfaces for plugging in a regular car and plugging in a false car. And while the thing is active, the different states of the system are actively highlighted to show how does it go through its different life cycle elements to show me how a operator would actually control it, how the user interacts with the system, and how it all fits together. So I set the charge amount, as you see here, to 15. We then push the go button, and 15 plus 31 is 46, so it'll go up to 46, and then it'll stop. So you're now going to ask, what does this have to do with the Internet of Things? That's next. So we've got this bit. Now what we say is, okay, we've defined the behavior for one particular one. And as you see here, we've now going to specify that we're going to plug in a counterfeit car. So it's then going to check the car. It'll go through the things, check it. It'll come up and say, actually, that's bad car. We'll have a fraud attempt. It'll go into the shutdown sequence, and then it'll shut down, and the manager will have to physically restart it. So let's look at this in terms of how it then all fits in with the Internet of Things. We've got a different element here that allows me to take this user interface and then actually connect to the ThingWorks platform. So what we've got there is our ThingWorks car element. I can then specify different values, link this all together, and hook this up so that it actually runs as part of a ThingWorks interface. This is showing the ThingWorks running, so I've got different elements here that I've defined, SIM charger, local charge shapes, and what I'm doing here is taking this set of elements that got generated into ThingWorks, linking them to the user interface that I'd already defined for controlling a whole set of different car charging stations along the East Coast. There's even one in Baltimore. We thought we'd be local for the presentation. And you'll see later where there's a fraud attempt, and where the fraud, so this is our different types, and I can click on any particular one. In this case, this is the one in Boston. And the fraud attempt is in Boston, which I think says something about Bostonians. Anyone here from Boston? No? Okay. Well, my company's based there, so I can make fun of them, can't I? And as you see here, the Bostonians have done a fraud attempt, so as a result, it's going to then shut down the system. As you see here, it's showing Boston is off, and then it's a manager function to actually turn the charger back on. Anyways, what we've got then is we're looking at, again, this is before we've actually built any systems. We're just looking at how would we control this. not just how do you control a single charger, but how do you then scale this up? What are the problems you're going to have with scales? What are the communication networks you're going to have? When you build this up, what are the different types of problems you're going to have when you start looking at security within this system? But by building up these different simulations and starting with a very high level and working way down, what we end up with is a more safe, controlled, managed, and system engineered systems, which is, after all, what we're all about. Want to stop the demo? Or because it goes on like this, and it shows you, just to demonstrate that it actually are working together. What the demo does is we add a new attribute. You see how it's got a charging button over here? Well, we add one to here to show that the charging button at this system is actually connected to the other. I'll jump back to the slides. Where are our slides? We didn't shut down the slides, did we? Apparently we did. That's okay.
Well, we'd like to start questions here in a few minutes.
Yeah, go ahead and start, because the only slide I was going to show was, do you have any questions?
Okay.
So
First thing is,
I think we can do without it, but it is a cute
uh,
slide.
if anybody hasn't gotten their tickets for the book drawing, came in late, raise your hand and Ellie will give it to you. The other thing is, we need to have the microphones for the questions because we're recording this and we'd like to get all the questions on. So anybody, you got a question? Okay.
The question is the fraud authentication. Is there some kind of RFID tag or something that a verifiable customer would have so that it can be verified, or what?
What it is there's an ID element which is connected to the car itself, because it's not just it having driven for the last 50 years or so. You think, well, you put the thing in the the gas nozzle in there, and how in the world does it know? Wait a minute, this is an electrical connector. So of course, in addition to charging, you can also have data communications going back and forth. And what they do, and this is the way the systems actually work, they actually have a ID as a part of this, so that way, if you are authorized to actually charge, it shows up and can do either an auto payment, or you can stick a credit card in if you don't have enough credit or your credit card is. But there is a verification which is done, which is a part of the actual car charging system on the car.
Okay, thank you.
How would you keep home-built cars or other ancient cars or whatever and handle them in a system like this?
You would probably, if I were the car charging company, I would take and build into this an actual kit that allows you to go and within a factory authorized place actually attach this car charging system to it. This is how I would do it if it were me. Because as you say, it needs to be commoditized. One of the biggest problems they're having in California that they're trying to work out is how do you actually come up with a standard interface to all these car charging systems? Because we don't want the Elon Musk charging stations versus the Chevy Volt charging stations versus all the rest of it. And some of the more imaginative things I've seen is where people are looking at swapping out batteries rather than actually having car charging systems at all. You just sort of pull up, your battery gets unhooked, somebody sticks another one in, it pops up in there. But for that, we have to have standardized battery. But what the stuff that Elon Musk is doing as a part of this by making his battery technology available might actually get us there a little bit quicker. But this is how I would do it. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. I'll try not to do that again. If it's a gas car, yeah, that won't work. But as you notice, one of the things that they're doing with the Prius and the rest of it is they're actually adding charging connectors to it. Because what that allows you to do is to use the maximum battery, drive it home, recharge the battery so that you can actually get the most out of the electrical ability of it. And again, it makes you think that there wasn't a systems engineer involved in this, because you know what? That would have been the first thing I would have thought of. All you have to do is stick an electrical socket in there. Hell, I'm from Minnesota. That's where I grew up. And anybody who's from Minnesota, my late wife was from Texas. And we drove up in the summer, and she's seeing all these electrical sockets in the parking lot. She said, "What are those for?" And I said, "Well, when it's really cold, you plug your car in, there's a heater in the front there, and it keeps it from freezing." She said, "Yeah, right, I'm sure they do that." And I said, No, that's really what they use it for." And she had to ask a half a dozen people before she believed me. But as a result, is what I was saying is, how hard is it to just simply put a little socket on there you can plug in and charge your Prius? It's not that big a deal. But again, it's how do you actually make use of this? And now, what is it, 15 years later, they've actually got them.
Okay, we got another question here.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple things here. You're talking about incompatible interfaces. You just said something about car heaters. I think that also keeps the oil in a more viscous, less viscous state.
Yes.
In the -20, -30 degree weather.
Oh, we used to get to
it's not enough
-50.
power to keep the internal seat heated.
No.
Although they're,
It keeps the engine block from freezing. And
Yeah.
as you pointed out, the problem that we had wasn't even that the water would freeze, the oil would freeze inside the engine unless you actually plugged it in, if it got to below 50 below zero. And if you're in Alaska, they actually just keep the cars running 24 hours.
Yeah, so about the interfaces, so do you, in the system, you have sensors, well, you mentioned something about fraud. That means you're only shutting down that charging station, not that the guy, has to get up out of what he's doing personally and go out.
No, he doesn't.
Really, it's a charging station you're talking about in fraud.
Correct.
Right?
The charging station, that particular one gets shut down.
And then what about the locations? They have a sensor system to which locations are available on a grid network, or displays to tell them when they come in where to go in the row and space.
And this is what I was saying, and because of the traffic boards that I've seen, as I said in the past, we looked at this and you wouldn't have enough space on it to do it. So this availability, I think, would really have to be part of one of the navigation apps. The other point that, again, we've started re-looking at this, and I've been doing a lot of post-processing. You teach an example for a few years, and after a while you think, how can we make this more interesting? And we looked at it and we said, well, it counts people in and counts them out. Because I have a set number of car, motorcycle, disabled, and electric, I actually have to have a means by which I identify which cars come in and which cars leave, so that way I can actually make this available. Because again, my late wife, she was in a wheelchair, so we would constantly be running all over trying to find disabled spaces because people were parked there for just 5 minutes while they run into the store. But that's a whole nother story. But as a result, we've now got a whole new set of requirements that weren't a part of the original thing, because otherwise we don't know, and especially for the electric cars, people are going to waste a lot of battery life.
Yeah. So do you have a built-in test equipment and all that to look at the health of every station?
And that's what part of the thing works is, so that you can do remote monitoring of all this. Because these days, one of the biggest issues is, I've got a whole nother set of slides that talks about how do you show this at a high-level abstract view versus a detailed view. And it shows complete manual, complete automated systems. And if we want to try to automate this to save costs, you would have to do it this way. It would have to be totally automated, and you'd have to have remote control.
Okay, Mark's got the last question.
Okay, switching back to the time-phased capability and project views, I think it's, can't remember the numbers, CV3 and PB2s or something like that. They're very similar, obviously, to Gantt charts and
that was
Microsoft
deliberate.
Project and others. So Can you talk a little more about the advantages of having them in the tool versus just using a Gantt chart?
The intention of these diagrams is to do this at the macro level. As I always say to people, would you use this to manage projects? And good God, no. You use this for portfolio management, or the British term is program management, with a ME on the end of it. Because you're trying to look at, as I said, here's all my capability. For instance, one of the projects you did was for submarine system. Here's 50 years of submarine capability. And you're trying to see maintenance cycles, when submarines are coming in and out. What are the projected technologies you're going to need? This is one of the Nkosi papers I'm going to give in Edinburgh at the end, in July. But it's at the big picture, and where you're trying to manage your capabilities as opposed to manage your projects. Now, in that case, I was showing how you can show the phased deployment of the different systems, and also look at, for instance, if you're swapping this system out for another, how do you actually make sure that you've got some level of overlap, redundancy, et cetera? Because as you saw with the capabilities, you can specify, here's the capability, here's the systems that provide it. It shows me when I have unnecessary redundancies, because I can look at them, but also necessary redundancy as well, where I may need 2 or more systems operational at any one time to support a capability. And these are the sorts of things they use it for, to actually look at availability. So it's more, think of it as a lifetime or life cycle management of the system rather than detailed project management, and capability life cycle based on systems that support it than anything else. We've also got, again, that's for Saturday, a whole nother set of things that allow you to define a process and then automatically generate project schedules for this in Microsoft Project. But as I said, that's a whole nother story. Hey, Doug.
All right, so now we're going to draw for the book of the meeting. I did actually do some research on Amazon, and I found this book called The Internet of Things Business Primer. And so basically, I think that's what you're sort of talking about, the high level.
It is.
Why are you doing this? What are you going to achieve when you do that? So we had a lot of good, this is a new book out, but everybody had 4 stars on it. So I thought we'd give that a try. So
All right. See, I didn't even have to memorize anyone's number. Okay. Are we ready? Somebody shout bingo when they see their number come up. 9935940. How's that for suspense, huh?
It's Craig Tyler. There we go.
Craig Tyler, well done. Do you know, I still have 2 Chesapeake Bay chapter mugs, and I was drinking coffee from one the day before I came here and thinking of you guys. I don't have the new one. I have the old white one. So I'm glad I have a new one to add to my collection.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. I like
Yes,
bigger.
it's a nice new cup.
We're going to give you a whole set.
Right. We have a certificate.
Yes. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Let me get over here. Let me make it official. Gotta shake your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Like this.
Thank you very much for coming to talk with us tonight. And we'd also like to encourage everyone to go to the Saturday tutorial and thank Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab for their hospitality and for hosting our events. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
You need to be a juggler to do a good job.